Welcome to Real World, Real Talk with Dr. D.Z. Cofield. The show represents captivating conversations and insightful information to encourage and inspire you with all you need to become the best you can possibly be. And now, your host for Real World, Real Talk, Dr. D.Z. Cofield.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Real World, Real Talk. I'm your host, Dr. D.Z. Cofield, and you are listening to your member-supported public radio station, your number one source for jazz and more, your community station, KTSU 90.9 on the FM dial in the Houston metropolitan area, and KTSUradio.com. Let me take care of a couple of housekeeping matters because, man, we have a power-packed show on tonight. We're going to be talking about 2020, the year in review. And we're going to look back over this past year, see what happened, and then see what lessons we have learned as we move forward into 2021. I had an opportunity to talk to a gentleman who said to me, you know, he went to see his pastor and his pastor prophesied over him that 2020 was going to be his year. And he jokingly said he was going to go back and get his money back because this was not his year at all. 2020 has been a year that I think the overwhelming majority of us would like to forget. But the question is, what happened? What lessons can we learn and how can we move forward as we get ready to move into a new presidential administration? There's so many things that are on the table, including COVID-19 and treatments, vaccines that are coming online, economic crisis, so many things going on. Man, this has been a tremendous year. Now, if you'd like to follow me during the week, you can follow me on Instagram at DZ Cofield. You can follow me on Twitter at DZ Cofield. And you can also follow me on Facebook at, you guessed it, DZ Cofield. One of the most powerful sources of news in our community are Black newspapers. And one of the Black newspapers that serves the Houston metropolitan area is the Defender newspaper. That media outlet, including their online services, has been in existence for 90 years. And we're happy to have with us two of the leaders of the Defender network of news, and that's none other than the managing editor, Rashonda Tate Billingsley, and the associate editor, Oswald Walker. And I want to thank both of them for being with us today on Real World, Real Talk. My brother, my sister, thank you all so much for being with us on today. What's going on?
Oh, well, thank you so much for having us.
Good to be here, brother.
So let's go back. Man, 2020 has been some kind of year, and I know you all are getting ready to release your year in review issue, and love to give some of our listeners an opportunity who may not be aware of your publication, kind of quality that you all produce, but also talk about some of the things that have happened, the people that we've lost, the issues that we've struggled with over the last year. I can remember it was in January, Sunday afternoon, about 12 o'clock or so. I was sitting outside. It was a nice day. And I can remember my wife opening the back door and saying to me, "Hey, did you hear what happened to Kobe Bryant?" And I said, "No, what happened?" And she said, "He died." And I was like, "What?" And it seems like, man, the year just took a nosedive from there on. So Rashonda, let's talk a little bit about how you all have approached this year in review episode, this year in review addition to the newspaper, because so much has been going on.
Right. If we had our choice, we'd just scratch 2020 and just start all over in January 1st. But one of the things that we've done is we've narrowed down the top stories of the year. We've done the top 10 stories. We've narrowed them down in both national and local, state. We've looked at the top 10 obits, the those that died this year. We looked at the top 10 sports stories, the top 10 high school sports stories. And so we're taking it from that approach, as well as the top 10 entertainment. And we're looking at those stories and just presenting just a snapshot of those stories to the readers.
All right. Well, let's start with whatever top 10 list you want to start with.
Well, we'll start with our our top 10 national stories. Of course, would be COVID. This hit the Black community hard. And, when the new year began, few people had ever heard of the coronavirus. If you're like me, I got sick in January, and now I swear I had COVID before anybody knew what it was. But it was first detected in China in 2019, which is why they call it COVID-19. But the first confirmed U.S. case came here on January 21st, and it just went downhill from there. I remember looking at the news on MSNBC and seeing, wow, 200 people died. And MSNBC one day had an error, and they put 2,000 instead of 200. And I was like, that 2,000 would never happen. And here we are approaching 300,000. So the COVID-19 was definitely one of the top stories of 2020, and how it affected the African-American community.
Yeah, it's amazing because I had members who, like you, had the disease, some who got violently sick at the end of 2019. And when they look back and they chronicle the symptoms, nobody in the medical community could tell them what was wrong with them, but they had all of the symptoms, all of the issues that are present now and presented as the telltale signs of having COVID-19. And like you, they swear they had it because, man, they had all of the symptoms for it. Oswald, as you look at the national scene, COVID, without question, captured us. What was another subject matter on the national scene that the Defender looked at and said, man, this is a top 10 story?
Of course, the 2020 election. So much about that election was both historic, sad, also gave us something to hang our hats on in terms of hope for the future. But from the black perspective, the 2020 election for many of us was literally life and death. There were other folk who were pushing to remove President Trump from office, but they looked at it as, this would be an opportunity for us to get back to quote unquote normal. For black folk, it was like, this person is literally putting our lives on the line. He is actively encouraging white nationalists, white domestic terrorism. He is actively undercutting all the norms of democracy and decorum. And we were feeling that, still are feeling that, on a very real and daily basis, especially in terms of his, endorsement of the white nationalists, endorsement of police violence against black people. And so the election for us was life and death. And the way we turned up and turned out in terms of voting was historic and monumental, especially, black folk who preaching a message that voting doesn't matter. I've heard some millennials, some young folks say, man, just let the whole system burn down. It's not doing us any good anyway. So even with all that, our turnout was record numbers. Here in the state of Texas, even before the November election, you remember all those elections before that when TSU was on national news because of the long lines at the polling place that was on campus. Folk were hyped and ready to vote. And I think a lot of that had to do, of course, with removing Trump, but then the ascension of Senator Kamala Harris to the vice presidential candidate position. That was a huge push.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I talked to my son who is 31 just turned 32, and we were talking along with my daughter in love, and I think what was interesting, we were talking about how President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris were elected. And I had a concern that if the millennial population did not come out, that Trump was going to win, because I did not believe that even the white women who repented for voting for Trump in 2016, I didn't think that they would vote for a black woman to be in a position of power before they got there.
I didn't either.
I really believe that because white people historically will vote against their own best interests if they see it benefiting black people. Right. And so I was firmly convinced that, man, if they didn't come out, the choice that Vice President Biden made for his running mate would backfire on him. And they came out without question. They came out strongly. They came out, but the real person of the year, I know what Time Magazine said, the real person of the year should be the black woman. And I'm not going to try to mansplain that. I'll let Rashonda take that up. But the role that black women played, young folk did show up and show out, and that took us over. But without the organizing and the leadership of black women all across the country, it wouldn't have happened. But I'm gonna stop mansplaining. No, I agree with you. I think black women, but I think the assumption was that black women were going to come out. That's true. When we looked at white men and white women, a greater percentage of white women voted for Trump this time than voted for him in 2016. Right. White men, and then a number of black men. I think 18 to 20% voted for President Trump. And, I'm still trying to figure out what Ice Cube and Lil Wayne talking about. But that's a whole nother story.
A pardon. That's what Lil Wayne talking about.
A pardon. Well, self-serving. I can see that. So Rashonda, let's talk a little bit about voting, because I think you could have characterized that as a top 10 all by itself. Just people who were mobilized, people who came out. The work that Stacey Abrams did, for example, in Georgia, absolutely tremendous. To flip a state like Georgia that has been red for so long. She, along with everybody who was part of that team, did a tremendous job. Let's talk about what Aswad talked about and referenced, and that's really the person of the year, black women.
Absolutely. And that is one of our biggest stories, is just the role that black women played in so many aspects of voting. One of the biggest one is the record number of women that's elected to Congress. Women gained at least 14 congressional seats in the 2020 election. So that's a new record for female representation. On January 3rd, at least 141 women, including 51 women of color, will be sworn in. Now, women will be at least 27% of the House and 24% of the Senate. And so you saw progressive activists that were elected. The Georgia Senate race will be closely watched, but we know they've already experienced record turnout of 168,000 on the first day. And that's because of the work of Stacey Abrams. So, and LaTosha Brown. So black women are putting in the work. They're getting behind, and they're motivating and inspiring the community. One of the things that I personally would do is I got on people's nerves during this election. I was emailing them, did you vote? Did you take somebody to vote? Can you call 3 friends and have them to vote? And so you really saw that a lot as we were going through this year with voting.
Yeah. All right. Give us our next story of the year nationally.
So another story of the year that we had was, of course, the killings of blacks that sparked unrest and protest. The killing of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, that sparked widespread nationwide protests and calls for an end to systemic racism, police misconduct, and brutality. So we saw marches all over the country from coast to coast, especially after Floyd's death, who, as you know, is a Houston native. And so we've seen protests for Breonna Taylor. And I love this year seeing the amount of people that turn their attention to the unrest. And in the past, we've been a hashtag. It's been a hashtag. People post about it and they move on. One of the things we saw in 2020 is they got from behind the computers and actually started to put their money where their mouth is, and not just posted about it and kept moving. They actually got out in the streets to go and protest.
And Rashonda, one of your daughters was one of those people, right?
Yes. In fact, I will have to admit, I'm one of those scary moms. My daughter is in DC, and I was like, get somewhere and sit down. And she wasn't hearing it. She's at Howard University, and she was out there making sure that her voice is heard. And I'm so glad to see young people like that. Her and her friends were out, and they wanted to make sure that they were sending a message, that they did more than change their profile pictures.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what's amazing is, and I know for me, I'm 58, 59,
Mm-hmm.
and I look back on the civil rights movement with this kind of historical reverence because I was too young to participate then. But it really hit me looking back through the lens of this year, how many people put their lives on the line. Mm-hmm. In order for us to experience the benefits now. And, that's a price that not a lot of people are willing to pay, especially my generation who has benefited from the sacrifice, but wasn't required to make the sacrifice. But this younger generation has taken it to the streets in the way that our parents and our grandparents did years ago. And, I like I'm concerned for safety and things like that, but they were like, no. They took that saying, before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave,
Mm-hmm.
And so it was inspiring to see a generation that we have heard talked about in a negative way so many times, to say, no, we're going to show y'all. We're going to lead the way. Oswald, you did some stories on George Floyd and the kind of person he was. We knew George here at our church. He had worked with us on several ministry projects, and he was friends with my 3 children. They knew him well. What was to you the most surprising and or inspiring thing surrounding his death?
I think you really already touched on it. The fact, well, both you and Rashonda, the fact that people moved from being appalled to putting that energy into action. It was inspiring to see the like you said, the courage of people willing to step up, stand out, speak out, do whatever to make sure their voice was heard, to push for change. And on one level, you've seen some of the biggest corporations on the planet responding to that, whether it's from the heart or simply from the pocketbook. You've still seen these folk try to move towards a more perfect union in terms of how they dole out opportunities and resources. But to me, it was the people. But not only that, the whole movement behind Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd speaks to 2 other issues to me. It speaks to all those sisters and brothers who died after them from police violence. And that's a story that still needs to be covered. One of which, well, actually, this one happened before them, and it happened right here in Houston. And hardly anyone knows this brother's name, Joshua Johnson. He was killed by a sheriff's deputy who gave one fantastical tale of what happened, which was diametrically opposed to the testimonies, so to speak, of the neighbors. They said something totally different happened, yet this story hasn't received the attention, hasn't caught the traction of national eyes and national ears. But I think, for Joshua and for all those who died way too soon, we've really got to put more time, attention, and energy on getting to the bottom of that case and the others that are still out there where justice has not yet prevailed.
Yeah, I think you're so spot on. I think about the young man who had some mental health issues in Denver, Colorado, and
Oh Lord, yes, right.
and he was killed. He died last year. And I'm telling you what really has struck me, and I don't know how you all feel about this. I had an occasion not too long ago to see and revisit the Rodney King beating. And man, I can't tell you how much more it bothered me now than it did when it first happened. And I really can't explain that to you, except to say, to see people even fired now for jesting about an action, and to see the number of times the late Rodney King was hit by this group of officers, on the one hand says we've come a long way, but it still says we've got a long way to go. And so it's man, it's really a tough time. Go ahead.
And to that point, we've run a series of articles, one of which will be coming out tomorrow. It's part of our redesign of public safety series, where we interviewed family members of victims. We interviewed Robbie Tolan's mother, and Robbie Tolan happened to survive his particular incident. We interviewed Philonise Floyd, George Floyd's brother, and to get their perspective. And we also interviewed the parents of Joshua Johnson. But we've also interviewed state legislators, the three state senators who are focused on police reform. And that article is coming out this week. But we've also talked to Dr. Cedric Alexander, who's known as the cop doctor. He's a CNN analyst on issues of police violence. And I mean, he's been a police chief 2 times over, but he keeps it exactly real. He keeps it 100 in terms of, in fact, he said, I've been a police chief 2 times over, but when I'm pulled over, I'm still a black man being pulled over by racist cops. Right. And so just to get their perspective on what needs to happen so that we can move away from this position where we are now. You say there's a whole lot of growth that's taking place. That's true, but there's so much more growth that needs to take place. And I was just really pleased that our team at the Defender took that on.
Yeah. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Real World, Real Talk. I'm your host, Dr. DZ Cofield, and I'm happy to have with me the managing editor and the associate editor of the Defender newspaper with us today, Rashonda Tate Billingsley and Aswad Walker, respectfully, as we talk about the year in review, 2020, what was going on, what happened, and how we move forward into 2021. Let's change up a little bit. Let's talk about some of the local stories that you looked at as we highlight the year in review. What are some things that happened locally? I know we were impacted by the national things, but what happened locally that you all highlighted, and whether it's politics or sports, what are some of the things that you all looked at and said, man, this is something we need to review and is worthy of review for 2020?
So like Rashonda said, COVID, the election dominated national news and impacted us locally. But as I was reviewing our local and state stories, I was kind of blown away. It's just been that kind of year, because I literally forgot that these things happened this year. When COVID hit, it seemed like, that was it. But in just going back, the fact that a leader of Texas Southern University, who was beloved by a whole lot of people, students, alumni alike, was let go, was released. And there was a whole big thing about him being released. The regents seeking to push him out. You had a group of people called Team Austin, made up of students and alumni, faculty and staff. that were fighting to keep him on. Then you had the regents give him a buyout of his contract. He's now the chancellor of Southern Illinois University. Several TSU regents have resigned over that and other issues. And I think Texas Southern, and, you know, just for transparency, I worked for Texas Southern for over 10, 11 years. So I'm very invested in the university. But I think TSU is still feeling the fallout from that, because one of the major stories that's happened this year, I think, is the level of gifts and investment in HBCUs all across the country. Prairie View A&M University being one that just received $50 million. In Prairie View, if you've been keeping track, every week it seems like they set a new record in terms of somebody giving them a gift. And you see all these HBCUs receiving funds, but TSU is not on that list. And this isn't news. This isn't provable. It's just a gut feeling that it's because of the fallout and the lack of consistency in leadership that TSU is not receiving those funds. But that was a huge story. But there was also the fact that Black communities stood up and fought against environmental racism and other forms of racism. You had that whole Black cancer crisis, which happened in January. Higher incidence of cancer in Fifth Ward, Cashmere Gardens, Settegast, Independence Heights, and other, northeastern Houston communities. But they stood up and fought back against that. You had Acres Home residents win a lawsuit against this concrete mixing plant so that they could save their residents from toxic air emissions. You had Fifth Ward residents and their elected official, Senator Boris Miles, force a company that owned a contaminated Cashmere Gardens Railway, Union Pacific, forced them to present a cleanup plan, which they weren't thinking about doing before residents stood up. So one of the things I think we need to celebrate is Black agency. Black people saying, we are not going to stand for this mistreatment. And here in Houston, you had Black community after Black community stand up, speak out, and get the change that they needed. And just on that environmental racism tip, I need to put it out there, Dr. Robert Bullard, who's considered the father of environmental racism, fighting environmental racism, also a TSU professor. He's just been awarded the 2020 Champions of the Earth Lifetime Achievement Award for his work in trying to end environmental racism. And that brother is right here in Houston, Texas. And that's just a couple of the local stories. You could go down the list of local entrepreneurs that have been just showing out this year. The brother from Third Ward who opened up Houston's first Black-owned drive-in. The couple who produce a product called Jinka that is in 31 area HEBs. Kim Roxy, an iconic local entrepreneur, has been just doing crazy things. Misty Starks, Denise Hamilton, Jerry Brooks, and so many others. Those are some of the stories I think we need to lift up, as well as the COVID impact, as well as the craziness going on at HISD with them not opening the door to Dr. Grenita Lathan, who's been doing the work for the past 2.5 years, and so many other things.
It's interesting. You say that. One, what for me has been the blessing of 2020, if I can call it that, has been the catalyzing, inciting effect that the Trump presidency has had on our community, along with COVID and et cetera. It's almost shaken us out of a state of apathy, of lethargy, to recognize that nobody's going to give you what you're not willing to fight for. Mm-hmm. And so to see that spirit of fight, it's a spirit that people in the LGBTQ community have. It's a spirit that women still have, recognizing that they haven't arrived. But for some reason, our movement from the hood into the lands and our socioeconomic rise in the Black class has caused us to get to a place of comfort that we can no longer afford to feel like we have, and so it's been powerful to see that happen. Rashonda, for you, what has been some of the local stories that have inspired you and excited you as you've looked back over this last year?
Well, definitely what Aswad mentioned, as well as some of the police reform and protests. One of the things that sticks home with me are like the Pamela Turner case out of Baytown, and just the police indifference. And now we have the Joshua Feast case in Lamarck. And so I really, it's just like across the country, we still are seeing Black people die at the hands of police. So that is a major story this year. And then HISD and Dr. Grenada Lathan, how you can give and give and give. She's led the district for 2 years and still not be given the job. So I don't, one of the things that I say is a strong story that is just the division on the HISD board. I would like to see some kind of way this ended or addressed. I don't know how. Because it leads to the next big local story, and that's the Black-Brown division in the African American and Hispanic communities. I really hate to see that because we can't afford any type of division. But when you have things like HISD and you have the Houston Community College issues where that chancellor is under fire, he is a Hispanic man and he's under fire from a lot and facing a lawsuit from African American former and current employees. We see that Black-Brown division, which is also a major story that we've looked at in 2020.
I think for me, and everyone has their opinion. For me, what has been the saddest commentary on what's going on at HISD is that nobody has been talking about student outcomes. Yeah. I am so tired of us talking about personalities and people and not talking about another generation of children who are being undereducated and virtually unemployable when they walk across the graduation stage. And I'm talking about our children. And it's been present for years, and it hasn't changed. It's like a Black person in charge, white person in charge, a person of a different sexual orientation in charge. At the end of the day, what's the data say? Because everybody's had their turn to lead, in all honesty. I mean, everybody's had their turn, right? We can look back historically and see the rotation where, after Dr. Page, it was Dr. Saavedra, and then it was Dr. Greer, and, everybody's kind of shifting. And it's, okay, now it's a woman's turn. Okay, now is it a Black person's turn? Man, but what about our children? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. I don't care if you're Black or white. I just want you to be right and take care of our kids and do what needs to be done. And with especially the TEA hanging over our heads, all of those things is still out there. It's going to be interesting to see how that moves forward. Let's talk about the deaths and meaningful deaths. What were some of the deaths that you all are highlighting in your year in review issue?
Yeah, unfortunately, this year's year in review obits is longer than any we've had in past. COVID did play a role in some of that, but it was really disheartening and sad to see some of the well-known men and women who had an impact on the local, state, and national levels. There was Dr. Earl Allen, the noted Houston pastor who was active in the civil rights movement. He died in February at age 87. We had Faye Bryant, the longtime HISD administrator. She was the district's first African-American female deputy superintendent. She died in February also. She was a former international president of my sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha, Sorority Incorporated. We also saw, on the national level, people like Herman Cain, who died reportedly from COVID after attending a super spreader event. There was also David Dinkins, the first African-American mayor of New York City. He died in November. we saw actors and actresses, but one of the ones that hit hard here at home was Al Edwards, the former Houston state representative. He served in the Texas House for nearly 3 decades. He died in April at the age of 83. The Texas Southern University family felt a hard loss with the loss of Dr. Thomas Freeman. That legendary debate coach died in June at age 100. We saw Katherine Johnson, the mathematician who came to fame from the Hidden Figures movie. She died in February at age 101. And then, of course, as you know, Pastor Manson Johnson, the pastor of Houston's Holman Street Baptist Church for 43 years. So we have, that list. When I saw it and I was scrolling down and I was like, wow, will this list ever end? And it just felt so 2020. 2020 is a verb now, but it just felt so 2020 to look at all the lives that we lost this year.
Yeah, and for our listening audience, Representative Al Edwards was one of the catalysts in our state to form Juneteenth as a holiday. He was one of the sponsors of that legislation many years ago, and we certainly miss all of those. One of the deaths that I know shocked people in our community across the world was the death of Chadwick Boseman.
Yeah.
Played the Black Panther, and had all of us longing for a Wakanda experience, even though that country was fictional. There's a part of, I think, every Black person who wanted to go to Wakanda and experience that. Talk about, Oswald, how his death affected so many people who were not aware that he was in a 4-year battle with colon cancer.
And I think when that news came out, that the number of movies that he shot during his battle that he kept to himself was a testament to his spirit and his personal mission to provide our community and really the world with powerful, positive images of Black people showing agency, leadership, courage, intelligence, and so much more. You saw people from the sports world, from the intellectual college world, from all over, give their condolences to the loss of this brother. And the thing that really touches and moves me is his friends and co-workers, actors and directors, their remembrances of him. Each and every one of them say the same thing, that he had this level of gravitas that you could literally feel when he walked on set. Everyone felt like they had to up their game. They felt that he was regal, almost regal, yet grounded and humble. And the director of Black Panther, Ryan Coogler, I think.
Ryan Coogler.
He talked about how so much of the movie, what we saw on screen, was because of suggestions from Chadwick Boseman, who a lot of people didn't realize just how deep he was into African and Africana history. But all of his classmates at Howard will let you know that he was always the same level-headed brother who was really caring and concerned about the well-being of his people. And I'll just say, in terms of those lives that were lost, because that really, I remember the day my daughter came downstairs and told me the news. I I literally could not believe that. Just like Kobe's death, I was it was right after church, and we were having a fellowship. That's pre-COVID, when we could actually have fellowships. And someone came in and told, and I just could not believe it. But other deaths that impacted me personally are the death of Joe Morgan. He was a star here in Houston with the Colt 45, but I'm originally from Cincinnati, Ohio, and that's where he is a legend. For the Big Red Machine. He passed away. And then John Lewis and the Reverend C.T. Vivian, who were both giants in the civil rights movements. So we've just had so many deaths that have really, really hit us in the gut. But that Chadwick Boseman passing, man, that we're still feeling that now.
Yeah, and I would be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about the notorious RBG, Ruth Bader
Yes.
Ginsburg.
Definitely, right.
And she just, transcended the Supreme Court to become a pop icon. Rashonda, when you think about the work that she did, the fact that this woman argued so many cases in front of the Supreme Court and literally had to educate the men on the Supreme Court regarding the plight of women and why it was important for them to rule in the way that they did, and her historic appointment to that position. Talk about her life and her legacy.
Yeah, so one of the things that I love seeing is people were anytime she sneezed wrong throughout the year, people would get nervous. I love that she became a legend for young and old, black and white. She crossed those barriers, and everyone recognized what it is she did for women in particular, but just for America as a whole. And so her death had an impact across the board, and it also ignited. We did see it. It ignited a fire inside of several people, black and white, several young women, in their fight for equal rights for women and justice for women. And so that is why she was on our list as one of those that really had an impact across the board. She crossed boundaries in terms of having that impact.
Yeah, absolutely. It was sad. And I know, like many people, she was trying to hold on until the election. She believed that President Trump would be voted out, and she wanted her position to be filled, that appointment to be done by Vice President Biden. And
even before that, 4 years ago, she believed that Hillary Clinton was going to win, and her plan was to retire then. But because she didn't win, this woman who was 978 years old, she said she's going to hold on and hold out as best she can. I mean, that's pretty darn heroic, man.
Yeah, no, absolutely. On the entertainment side, we lost Bill Withers, whose song "Lean on Me" has been an anthem that has been sung across the world, and I think that's a song that, when it gets started, everybody can sing along with that song. And in this day and time, it has become so meaningful. And then the legendary Betty Wright also passed away. And so, man, there were just so many top.
We lost Debo, Tommy Lister, Charlie Pride, Johnny Nash, who I didn't know until he passed was from Houston, Texas.
From Houston.
I can see clearly now,
Yeah. No,
there was also William Bubba Thomas, the Houston drummer.
Yes, right. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, no. So you're absolutely right. That list is really, really long. What are some other things that you all are highlighting in this 2020 review issue?
Well, one of the things, we had a lot going on in the sports world. And so our professional and college sports, we have an extensive list on that, from the Rockets getting a new coach to them playing in the bubble. So we do, our Terrence Harris, our sports reporter, has done an amazing job of that. Everything from the NCAA canceling their men's and women's basketball to the NBA, MLB, NBA and the MLB pausing or delaying their seasons. The Texans and general manager, head coach Bill O'Brien trading DeAndre Hopkins. And then the hiring of Dusty Baker. So we tackle some of the sports stories, the biggest sports stories in Houston. You'll find that in this edition as well.
I tell you what, I wish Bill O'Brien had waited to trade him after he got fired.
I know.
that would have been the deal. Let's talk a little bit about working from home. And because, this has been the year of the internet and the year of Zoom and all kinds of social media platforms and adjusting to being at home. What do y'all have to say about that?
I have to say, I wish I would have had some Zoom stock before this year started. We'd be in a better position. But Rashonda wrote several really powerful articles about this subject.
Yeah, and one of the things for those of us that are already always work from home, people are starting to realize, because I used to get the calls, what are you doing? I work from home. What are you doing in the middle of the day? Well, I'm doing the same thing you'd be doing if you were on your job. Well, now people are at home and they get it. But one of the things, it's been a challenge for people, especially those trying to educate their children at the same time they're trying to do their job. And so that's a big story for many families, because trying to be on Zoom all day, handle your work, and handle everything that's going on with your family. For me, I was saying I had to play principal, lunch lady, teacher, everything with my son. I would get him situated for school, come and go do a Zoom meeting and work, and then look up a few minutes later and he's back in the bed. So it's a constant. When the schools opened up, I was not too happy to send him back. I armed him with some holy oil and sent him back in person, because it's a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah.
We had one person that we interviewed on this particular issue. She's a teacher. She's a high school teacher. And she actually taught her classes from her classroom. They were virtual classes, but she was in the school, in the building, in her classroom teaching. But while she's teaching these virtual classes, she has her own 2 children, an elementary school child and a 5th grader, in the classroom with her. And so while she's teaching, she's also trying to monitor the educational movement of her 2 children. And I thought, that's literally insane. How do you do that? I mean, the position that we're putting teachers and students and school workers in, it's been crazy. The reopening plan from the state of Texas, which happened too soon, if you ask my opinion, putting so many people in harm's way. And now we had stories that highlight the failure rates of students, virtually, and those that are taking classes in class, because like one of the individuals that we interviewed, she's a teacher as well. She said it's a no-win situation, and either way you turn, the students that are in the class and the students that are taking classes virtually, they're both losing out. So that's going to be an ongoing story.
Yeah, I think, what's amazing to me is the expectation that you could take a brick and mortar model and just transfer it to a digital platform and it would work. That nobody actually thought through. No, there's a different dynamic. There's a different psyche. There are different methodologies that have to be in place for you to successfully do anything at home that you would normally do in the office, and our failure to really think through that. And I agree with you, Oswald. I think we move far too quickly to bring our kids back. Our parents weren't prepared in terms of digitally technology. We didn't have those kinds of technology camps for them to get them up to speed. We expected our children to be up to speed, and even though they are digital natives, there were still some nuances and things that they didn't understand, and they didn't have the emotional and maturity to be able to handle on their own. The economic crisis, where do you see us going? That has, without question, affected us. The number of businesses that have shut down or on the verge of shutting down. Many of us went into mourning when we got news that our local Luby's was closing. Went to a restaurant, a vegetarian restaurant, just the other day, didn't know that they had closed, they had shut down. And so where do you see that going in our society today, both locally and nationally?
Yeah, that was one of our top stories. Is just how the pandemic devastated the U.S. economy. The economic effects were just overwhelming, with minorities, low wage earners, and small business owners suffering the most. There were an estimated 22 million Americans who lost their jobs, and we saw a lot of that here in Houston. You know, you had parents struggling to find childcare as daycare centers closed. People were being laid off, and the effects of that are going to be felt for years to come because so many people had to shutter their businesses. Small businesses were hit hard, and then the Paycheck Protection Program came along, and unfortunately, our African American businesses just did not were not able to take advantage of what was supposed to be a lifeline. And so we did see a lot of businesses close because of that.
And while they didn't receive funds, so many of the richest businesses and corporations in the country did. Funds supposed to be allocated to those businesses that needed it the most, yet, you know, like Rashonda said, didn't get it. But also, you know, to that point, we also saw 8 million people and counting move into the ranks of poverty. The biggest move in any one year in U.S. history, I believe.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, it's been a tremendous year. It's been a challenging year, and now I guess I'd like to close by asking the two of you, where do we go from here as we prepare for 2021? I'm not sure if the Defender Network is doing any prognostication, but I'd like to hear some from you all. Where do we go in 2021?
You know, I'd like to think there's nowhere we can go but up. Thankfully, we got some people in the White House with some sense that look at science and allow science to dictate what we're doing in terms of how we're handling this global crisis that we're facing. And so I think that will help once you're able to open the doors back up and get people comfortable and back out and to return to a sense of normalcy. For the longest, there were so many of us that were we didn't know what tomorrow held. And so you saw an apprehension in moving forward. I think now knowing that we've returned to a boring administration, I welcome a boring administration. We can focus on the positives and focus on rebuilding. And I think that's where we go in 2021 is just trying to rebuild businesses, rebuild families, rebuild our health. So many things that we lost in 2020.
And I think one of the biggest changes we'll see moving into 2021 and beyond is the level of civic investment and participation of individuals. I think a light has been turned on in terms of not only our agency, our ability to impact change, but our responsibility. All across the country, I see more and more community centers, churches, temples, mosques, et cetera, offering the community basically civics 101 classes, so that we understand better our role, we understand who to hold accountable, we understand that democracy, and well, Black folk, we've always known, you know, democracy was precarious because we rarely tasted the full fruits of it. But more and more folk are recognizing that it's not something that is static. It's something that has to be fought for and protected. And so when you awaken someone to their worth and their power, it's like letting the genie out of the bottle. There's no telling what they can do. When you allow someone to become their best selves, you just have to get out the way and let God work through them. So how that will play out, I don't know, but that's what I believe is going to play out. So I'm optimistic.
Well, I want to thank both of you for being with me on today to talk about the year in review. Again, 2020 has been a heck of a year. And I think, you know, if we could call reset, we would. But at the end of the day, I'm hoping that those of us who come out of 2020 and move into 2021, that we go in better and not bitter, and we go in more determined to be the best that we can be and to make the world the best that it can be. So thank you so much, Rashonda Tate Billingsley, the managing editor of the Defender newspaper, news network, and Oswald Walker, associate editor. The late Vernon John said, when you see a good fight, get in it. And I always add, if you don't see a good fight, start one. And if we don't see the need to fight now, then shame on us, because 2020 is a year that has forced you to fight. Fight for your sanity, fight for your well-being, fight for your family. You've had to fight. And many of us, we haven't fought in so long that we forgot how to fight. And so I pray that as you have been forced to remember and re-engage, that now you take this energy and you move forward in a positive way. Gentleman said to me, he sees 2020 like the bow and arrow, that it's the bow and arrow year. And I said, what do you mean by that? He said, well, you know, when you are shooting an arrow with a bow, you have to pull that bow back, and there's a tension when you pull it back. But eventually you get to the place after you aim that arrow that you release the bow and shoot that arrow forward. He said 2020 for me has been a bow and arrow year, in that I've been pulled back and I'm feeling the tension, but I believe in 2021 that the arrow is going to be released and we're going to go forward in a special way. I can only hope and pray that's true. Thank you for being with us tonight on Real World, Real Talk on your member-supported radio station, KTSU and 90.9 on the FM dial and KTSUradio.com. Stay tuned for Truth with V. Michael McKay and the crew on KTSU. And thank all of you for following on this podcast, the Real World, Real Talk Network. Until next week, God bless is my prayer.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Real World, Real Talk. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast to be notified of new episodes every week. Follow us via social media using the @RWRTDZ username on all platforms: YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. To submit any comments, questions, sponsor opportunities, or future show suggestions, visit us online at rwrtdz.com or via email at info@rwrtdz.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope you've been inspired to be the change you want to see in the world today. Until next time, be real, keep it real, and stay real.